Hi, this is Andy from mcgyversgarden.com, and last week we talked about a simple, easy watering system, and at the end of that video I asked you to take a homework assignment, and that was to find your average last frost date. Now the reason for this is this week we're going to go over when to plant your plants, and everything is tied to that average last frost date. If you haven't got that yet, you need to get it before we continue. At this point, my last frost date is May 31st. Now, what they'll generally tell you on the seed packets is plant so many days before last frost, or so many weeks before last frost, or so many days or weeks after last frost. And you notice all the dates are different. And the reason for that is that plants freeze at different temperatures. For example, tomatoes freeze at 29 degrees. So if the temperature never gets below 30 degrees, your tomatoes won't freeze. However, pumpkins can freeze at about 39 degrees. And so if you don't even have a frost, it can still damage your pumpkins as long as the weather is colder than 40 degrees. So what we're going to do is figure out when's the safe time to plant any of your plants. The other homework assignment I gave you was to decide what you wanted to plant, and you'll see why in just a minute. Let's go to what I'm going to have you do today is go to our website and download this planting guide and then print it out. And then what you can do is fill it out. And I'll show you how to do this, so it'll be relatively easy. Okay, let's go to the planting guide. If you know what your last transplant date is, then what you're going to do is fill it in right here. I used to live in West Jordan, Utah, and the transplant date on in that location was actually May 21st. Okay. Well, here Mcgyver, my new location is the 31st, so that's 10 days difference. Okay. Is it earlier or later? Well, it's earlier, so I can go 10 days earlier, and I can cross out the later, so I'm not even going to be confused with that later. And I would suggest you do the same thing. Put down what your new frost date, is. Is it earlier or later? Put it in the right spot and cross out the other one. Now, what we can do is figure out what you want to grow. Let's say, for example, I want to grow pole beans. I want to grow broccoli. Let's make sure I get it on the right line here. Broccoli. And we'll say, for example, carrots, just for the heck of it. Okay, there's 3 examples. Now, what I'm going to do is say, okay, my date is 10 days earlier than Mcgyver's, which is May 31st. So, on all these dates, here, oops, I'm off it there, and there, we're going to want to change these dates. Okay, so 10 days earlier than April 6th would be approximately March 26th, somewhere around that. 10 days earlier than May 25th would be May 15th. Okay, and you'll want to do this with a calendar in front of you. Okay, so 10 days earlier than March 23rd would be March 13th. 10 days earlier than May 10th would be May 1st or April 30th. And on carrots, you're going to direct sow those into the garden. So that would still be May 1st. And at that point, if you wanted to, you could go through and cross out all of my dates and just refer to your own dates. Now you notice if you're planting your seeds indoors and starting with the seed starter we had, you're just going to worry about the dates that you're planting, okay, the plants you're planting. But so it's not as intimidating as this whole list, but I tried to make it as easy for you as possible. If your date happens to be pretty close to May 21st, you can just use these dates straight down the list. Okay, The plant indoor dates, as long as you get them within the week, that's fine. The plant outdoor dates, again, this is tied to your average last frost date. And the problem with that is that the average last frost date is only 50% accurate. Okay? So you're going to want to take a look at what the weather pattern is about the time you go to plant them outdoors. It doesn't hurt to plant them out a little later. Now we had a gentleman that sent in a suggestion to Park Seed Catalog back in 2009. He says, I am a grandfather. He says his name, he goes by Bumpa. He says, I'm a grandfather, and it was my grandfather who taught me this tip that really works for areas with frost. Always watch the lilacs before you plant. He says when the lilacs start to show bloom tips, you can direct plant onions, garlic, and peas. When the lilac blossoms are open, plant potatoes, carrots, lettuce, all of your cole crops like broccoli and cabbage, and turnips, etc. When the lilac blossoms begin to fade, only then can you safely set out tomatoes, peppers, etc. Now would be the time to plant beans, corn, squash, watermelon, and cantaloupe, and all other tender vines, either from seed or setting out plants. He says, I have done this every year and it works. I now have a balcony garden, so it changes a bit because of the microclimate on the south side of the building. Yeah, I hope you find this helpful, and I hope you have lilacs. Well, I'll tell you what, I checked back on my location in West Jordan, and that was accurate all but one day in 30 years. That makes it 96% accurate. So that's something you may want to consider for your transplant date, is check your lilacs. It's a pretty decent way to go. Now, what happens if you got your plants planted, and you're getting ready to go on vacation, and suddenly you find out there's going to be a freak frost that next week? What do? Well, I can show you a quick Mcgyver trick for that next week. We don't call this Mcgyver's Garden for nothing. So tune in next week, and I'll show you a quick, inexpensive trick for beating the frost, beating those late frosts. Thank you, and may all your weeds be wildflowers.